The only Rick and Morty season 3, the only answer I can get from anybody is like, "Oh, bring it back to the store and we'll exchange it." You don't have any more, you fucking moron. Like, I just want to choke people. I am really, really mad. Sorry.
Tell them that you'll keep the case, but you want some of the Blu-rays or DVDs out of one of the regular cases because they use the same ones for that.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to do, and nobody seems to understand that. It's like, oh, we have a couple in stock at the Mayfair Mall one. Oh, you mean the one that's like 2 hours away that I can't get to by bus? Fuck you.
You can even offer them the empty regular case back. It's like, just pretend that I'm giving you the empty.
Yeah, that's. I'm gonna have to go out there and complain tomorrow. I'm gonna try to do that.
You know, you can get to the Mayfair Mall one by bus. There is a bus that runs there.
Yeah.
I don't have all day for that.
Oh, well, you can't say you can't get there by bus. You actually can.
Do not have vehicles.
I didn't even know the bus went out there.
Yeah, it does. It
totally I could get there by bus. It would just take longer.
I don't want to spend like 4 hours in traveling for this. I'm like mad. And I'm not thinking clearly.
You could probably take 1 or 2 buses and get you to Highway 100 and then go all the way up Highway 100.
Fuck that. I want to do that.
So, welcome back, ladies, for episode number 97 here on the Inside Movies Galore podcast. And here we have a documentary that we are delving into called Beyond the Mat, directed by a Barry W. Blaustein in 1999. So I'm gonna start off by saying that documentaries are always hard for me to talk about. Like I was starting to say before we started recording, because they are a narration is normally about something real, and basically it's either footage or that is either taped about several subjects or something. It's basically facts put together with footage, and it's hard for me to talk about them because they're so real. But I figured this was a decent subject. Dane, since you suggested this documentary, I'm going to start with you. You're on the hot seat.
All right. Well, so yes, I did suggest this one because this film came about in my life in I think it was like the summer of 2015. This was after I had finally seen The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. Many years after it came out, and I loved it. Loved it because it would introduce me to the world of professional wrestling, which I, like everyone during the Attitude Era, I knew that it existed because it's the media outreach of the WWF at the time, now the WWE. But their media outreach was so strong that it was one of those things that you couldn't help but be aware of, even if you didn't personally watch it, because there was no way I could have been able to watch that when I was a kid. My parents would not have allowed it. But watched The Wrestler, and I was really interested. I don't know why, but I just became obsessed with learning about professional wrestling as a craft and wanting to know kind of the behind the scenes drama and what it takes to make this happen. And so, I watched some of the documentaries that WWE themselves that they put out, which are, they can be of all different kinds, of different takes that they, different approaches that they put on it, and then depending on the wrestler, but they all kind of come out of the WWE media machine. So it's whatever spin they want to put on it. Beyond the Mat doesn't have that. That film tackles things in a pretty honest way, not only with the WWF at the time, but they also talk about ECW before WWE bought it. They talk about the indie scene, which is really, really hard on the bodies and just spirit of the people who perform in it. They do not get paid a lot; they get paid pennies, in fact. And just kind of shows you that no matter what stage you're at in your career in that world, that unless you are a John Cena or you're The Rock or you're, whatever stage you're at in your career, if you're just kind of a rank and file jobber, as they say, just someone who's there to, just to be in the ring, then life is really, really hard. And it shows, this film shows that in pretty great detail and, follows three particular wrestlers at different stages in their careers. Like we have a wrestler who's kind of at the end of his rope, which he's been at the end of his rope several times since then, which was Jake the Snake Roberts. You had the Terry Funk, who was during one of his many times in his career where he looked like he was going to retire, and he came back several times after the film shows that he was retiring. And then, of course, Mankind, who was, that's what he went by at the time, but he was putting his body through literal hell for the entertainment of the audience. And it just kind of shows you that those people are made of stronger stuff and that you have to be a little crazy in order to do any kind of performance art like that, or any kind of athletic endeavor like that.
I'm going to stop you right there and then go over to Katie here. Katie, this was your first time watching the documentary.
It was not.
It was not?
Actually, no, I've seen it before.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
When
not in a long time, but I have seen it. I probably saw it in the early 2000s, I would say. I grew up on wrestling. I grew up on WWE's Attitude Era stuff. Like I've been to Raw, SmackDown, Nitro, all that, probably a pay-per-view at one point. So I was a big wrestling fan as a teenager. And I probably like stopped really following it. I would say probably like the mid 2000s or something. My daughter actually follows it pretty closely now, and her dad still takes her to events, but I've kind of dropped out of it. But it was interesting watching this film again this many years later from the perspective that I have now, which is that I've produced burlesque shows before, so I understand to a different extent what goes into producing a show at all. And then I look at professional wrestling and the spectacle that they produce on, a daily basis. And it blows my mind a lot more so than, ever before. So it was neat to watch this documentary again and sort of get that different take, from that perspective. And also I think it really, again, highlights for me that, wrestling may be choreographed in that you kind of know what the outcome is going to be, but these guys put themselves through some real physical challenges and blood, sweat, and tears, and that part of it is very much real and very much a passion and an art that I can relate to a lot better now, being a performer that has to use my body. So I thought this time around it was good that I watched it again, because it had been very many years since I had seen it, and I don't think I got that much out of it. I just only looked at it from a wrestling fan's perspective, like, oh yeah, the washed up, Jake the Snake or whatever, and look at how he wasn't there for his kids, and then sort of just seeing it from that perspective, which is certainly an angle that this movie has too, which I think it's neat just to see the personal profiles of these entertainers. But I saw it from a different perspective this time around.
Okay. Red Raven, if there was anything, was this your first time watching this documentary? And
yeah, it was. This was my first time watching it, and I thought it was really good. I thought it described everything pretty well, and it showed everything pretty neat. And I thought they could have gone a little deeper into how some of wrestling is like scripted. I know they how they showed some of that, but like they didn't go as far as like, telling like how they wear earpieces or how the refs, are giving the wrestlers certain cues on how, when to do certain moves. But of course that's part of the act. They're not going to give away those kind of things, but they didn't get in that far into it. You know what I mean?
There is a great YouTube channel I would recommend for that sort of stuff called What Culture Wrestling, and they go into a lot of depth about some of the behind the scenes stuff that this didn't necessarily show, particularly on that level. So I'd just like to.
I guess when I thought I heard, beyond the mat, I was thinking a little more, describing what goes into like, the scripted, like how they, work all that stuff out.
More like the mechanics of wrestling itself, where this was more beyond the mat, like their lives beyond.
Exactly.
What it takes to make this.
It was more a history of some of the wrestlers.
Yeah, more like a personal profile.
Which now keep in mind, I think the reason why that was done that way is because this was during a period in pro wrestling history where so we had already had the kind of classic era and the new, I think it was the new generation era after that. Back when in that time wrestling was seen as sort of family friendly, kind of cheesy, fun, but it was still presented as real. And then when Vince McMahon, seeing the ratings plunge, he decided to kind of, and also, well, no, not the ratings, well, kind of yes, but it was about trying to avoid having to submit to a lot of the same tests that a sport does, expose the business and show that it was all choreographed and everything. So at that time, then they kind of embraced that and said, okay, we're gonna do something really different to compete with WCW, and we're gonna fully embrace it and also do the the Attitude Era. So we're gonna have anti-heroes, and we're gonna have people that don't fit a lot of the classical notions of heels and baby faces, or bad guys and good guys. We're not going to have that. And so at that time, with that big change, WWE and wrestling in general was bigger than ever. So they introduced what wrestling was, that identity. They introduced it to people that had never really watched it before under the more classic Hulk Hogan. And
that's true. This was made in what, 99?
Yeah. So by that time,
that makes sense. Yeah.
So in other words, by that time, with the Attitude Era, that is what a lot of people thought wrestling was, and that is indeed what it was at the time. And so then it was like, okay, so beyond the attitude, beyond the presentation, beyond the artifice of it, who are these people, and why would they be so crazy as to do this to themselves and to put on this kind of show? And it was a lot more in your face at the time, for good reason, because that was how they were able to distinguish themselves from WCW, which had bought out a lot of the classic people, the classic wrestlers like Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage and Bret the Hitman Hart. They had all gone to WCW, and so they, a lot of these people that formed that classic era, they were already over there, so they had to do something radical, and they made a lot of noise, and that's what happened. They changed the face of wrestling.
I really enjoyed the profiling of Mick Foley in that documentary too, like showing, because what we saw of Mick Foley is so one-dimensional compared to what he is, and obviously has come to be as time has gone on, and we've seen all of his characters and stuff. But like when I first ever saw Mankind, I think was the first version of Mick Foley that I ever saw. He's so much more than that, and I really liked how they
you could tell he was like a real family man. You could tell he cared about his family, and
definitely
he considered himself the more polite wrestler out of the whole bunch, because he didn't do a whole lot of swearing or this and that entirely to an extent where he didn't want to put on that kind of persona, especially when he had some very young kids involved, especially his wife. You know.
Well, that, and also keep in mind with Mankind, who is supposed to be like a more edgy character. Even then, he had Mr. Sacco, which is about, and he even said it was kind of a joke there. And then when they had the infamous, Rock versus Mankind, I Quit match, which caused pretty big waves, ripple effects throughout the wrestling world, even today. I mean, stuff like that is why they don't allow for chair shots anymore, because of brain damage. So, but even after having seen the footage and how much it traumatized his kids, it was like, well, maybe I need to tone it down, and it just shows that these people that put themselves through hell, and someone like him who is a family man, it's like, it does have a ripple effect, an unintended ripple effect, despite, it popping the crowd.
Kabuki.
Now, that's what I was curious about. Do you think that match was fully planned out exactly like that, or I mean, I know they improvised, but
well, that's a fair point, because some of the wrestlers, it depends on who you talk to, because I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's The Rock who likes to get the basics down and then kind of improvises the rest, and then it was Macho Man Randy Savage who liked to rehearse every single move that was going to happen.
It was a Royal Rumble match, wasn't it?
For which one, the I Quit match, or?
Yeah.
No, it was just it. No, okay. No, because Royal Rumble is where they have everybody get in there at once. But I think as far as the craft of it, it really depends on which wrestler you're talking about, what their style is.
Kabuki Jake, welcome back to the show. Was this your first time watching the documentary?
It was the first time watching this one, yes.
And what did you take from the film itself, if you could share with us?
Well, I did think it was very interesting. I will admit I have never been a wrestling fan, but as I've gotten older, I have learned a little bit more about it, and as a type of performance art or whatever, it can be very interesting. And as I said before, I think when we were talking about doing this, I am making an active effort to watch documentaries on a wide range of subjects. Just, it's always fun to learn new things.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the stuff, some of it was very interesting. That one scene you were talking about where Foley watching the footage again, that I was like, that was very interesting to see his, actual reaction there and how that played out. And I will admit, it was kind of, for someone who didn't watch wrestling, it was kind of fun going back and seeing The Rock as a much younger person.
Oh yeah, he looked a lot chubbier with that facial hair, eh?
And he had that goofy hair, and he also had, like, if you listen, he had a teensy bit of like a southern accent almost.
Yeah.
Because he went to school in Florida, I think, like college.
Right. And there were a couple things I'm sure you guys probably did this too, looked at like some of the background trivia on this and everything. But I've heard a couple things that I know, Dane, you mentioned the wrestler, and I don't know if you mentioned this, that apparently Aronofsky has credited this particular film as his inspiration for that character.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly Jake the Snake is the inspiration for Mickey Rourke's character.
Well, that and Roddy Piper, I think, got to see it, when he was still alive, and he cried at the screening because he felt like his story was told, and in fact, a lot of wrestlers had gone through something similar where they have their time in the sun, their bodies either wear out or they abuse, you know, steroids or cocaine or whatever, or some combination thereof, and you know their star fades out and all that stuff, and it's very, very sad, you know. But it's the
Jake the
story.
Snake story. His whole life is just so depressing.
Right.
Very
Like
much
hearing
so.
his story, everything in his life is just one disappointment after the next.
Well,
Yeah.
the fact that you know, after the documentary, I mean, it said that he never really talked to his daughter again after this.
Right.
And then he went to jail, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who said that? Now, of
Yeah.
course, well, this was what 18 years ago. You got to wonder what the full update would be, you know, for some of these people now. But you know,
And I'm sure people have, and also keep in mind that that was they interviewed Jesse Ventura. That would have been right as his historic victory for the governor of Minnesota. That was when that was still fresh in people's minds.
Oh yeah, that was a real
and-
different seeing him at that point in time as well.
Yeah, because he's gone on to have his own kind of alternative press career, you know, and kind of third party advocate kind of career, and you know, interesting. It was more interesting when you caught him at that stage when he was still governor, but he was still, you know, a pretty active voice in the world of, you know, of professional wrestling. But it just showed how, for certain kinds of people, that kind of path could be a springboard for bigger and better things, and it definitely was for The Rock. It was for it's currently proving to be that for John Cena, who is doing a whole lot more with acting, and then of course Jesse Ventura becoming governor. So you know it is acting, and it is performance art, and it is athleticism, all kind of wrapped up into one, and yet. And I know this because some people I know had worked with Goldust on a film of theirs, and apparently, yeah, they don't have a union. They don't really have any workers' benefits because they are officially independent contractors. That's how they're labeled in their you know, in their work, in their contracts, and you know, a lot of them, especially like in the stuff that Vince McMahon has been a part of, a lot of them have been let go for like really arbitrary reasons, for like looking at him the wrong way on the wrong day. You know, it's very strange and sad that they can be disposed of so easily.
One of the trivia things that I'd read was McMahon was upset about the success of this film because it was not a WWF production. And I guess they weren't able to monetize it, so he took offense to that.
Well, of course, and he couldn't control it, you know, because if you know, Vince McMahon, it should be noted, Vince McMahon is a good friend of Trump, and their mentalities are not too dissimilar to each other. And humorously enough, Trump is actually in the Celebrity Hall of Fame for WWE, because he performed, you know, in an episode like in 2006, I think. But the point is, like, in that spirit, Vince McMahon's attitude has always been very tight, you know, media control, very tight control over information about, you know, the business that gets out, and you know, and then the stuff that does get out, particularly about him, tends to be pretty outlandish. But you know, he's got such a bizarre personality, and he's kind of insane, that it's like, well, you know, no wonder. But you know, I think that the media arm and the kind of, pardon the expression, but the propaganda machine is pretty strong at WWE.
Okay. Dustin, this was a first-time watch for you, correct?
Yeah. So wrestling is not my typical thing. I used to watch a podcast where they were all wrestling fans, and they would occasionally make wrestling references. And one thing that was nice about this movie was I actually got some understanding of one of the particular ones. It's kind of hard to explain, but the setup, the joke that they would do is like they'd start like talking about something, and then they'd end with, it's like that time in 1998 when Undertaker threw Mankind off of the cage in Hell in a Cell. Like there was an episode where they just like made like 30 statements that ended like that, and like everybody was laughing. It was, well, I finally understand what that was about now. But the main point is, it was actually a pretty interesting look into like the background of that, like what those people's lives are like why they do what they do, and then kind of the toll it takes on your body too. I mean, The Wrestler already kind of gave me an idea of that, like even though it was fictional, but a lot of The Wrestler seemed to really hold to reality. So I mean, I thought it was pretty cool, and I'm happy I sat down and saw it. Towards the end, I have a ongoing personal crisis, which I'm trying to deal with. So I kind of wish I'd been able to pay better attention to the closing arguments. But I wouldn't mind going back and revisiting the parts that I kind of had to miss. Like, it was nice to get some kind of pathos from Jake the Snake. Because, I mean, I used to, when people would ask me, you know, what's your favorite wrestler when I was a little kid? I mean, I knew like 2 or 3 names max. And I would always answer Jake the Snake because he had a snake. And so it was kind of funny when they were interviewing some of those people. It's like, why do you like Jake the Snake? He has a snake. It's like, yeah, I know, right?
Was it a Best Buy related personal crisis or something else?
I will stab your eyes. Make you go watch.
Was this a first time watch for you?
Who, me?
It was. Me. But it was a first time watch for me. Actually, I have. When I was growing up, I did get. I was into a lot of the wrestling related, not as much the wrestling itself. I watched the Hulk Hogan cartoon show as a child. And even played the video games. Of course, my grandfather was always big into wrestling. Matter of fact, the anniversary of his death was Sunday. So he watched wrestling on the regular up until he passed. And so I always think of him whenever I think of wrestling and what's involved. I thought this actually was a good take. It wasn't one of those things. It was a film that assumed you understood the basics of what wrestling was about. But it was one that was more about the personal stories of individuals. And it was interesting to see the psychology behind each one because everybody was different. I mean, Jake the Snake, you could tell that there was definitely some sort of mental illness going on there, a little bit, maybe bipolar disorder, something like that. That really drove some of that. I mean, they even talked about how he was a brilliant individual, but he was also self-destructive. Then you had some of the other ones that had come on there, some of the ones who were just, kind of upset with this, but others who just loved it and just couldn't think of doing anything else. And that, in my opinion, was great because you got all of these different points of view. And for those who were big into that, especially at that time period, that would be great to see those of the big names in the business at the time just getting a little bit behind it. So I thought it was very well done and put together. I love it when you got like individual stories, especially if those stories are worth telling.
Cool. And for me, it was a first time watch for me. I had, like I've said before, I've never got really into documentaries until the last couple of years because. Unfortunately, when I was growing up, I was subjected to some documentaries that were quite boringly put me to sleep because of the narratives they used to put documentaries that would have these boring people who sounded like they You know, like they hadn't really talked before, you know, and I would find myself put asleep by the end of these documentaries that I would see, but I've had my eyes opened to some documentaries that recently, and this one is actually a good one. I mean, this guy evidently, when he was 8 years old wanted to, you know, go and see if he could seek out his favorite wrestlers. So I think he started with some of these underlings wrestlers that were, you know, just starting out, and of course you get some background of Vince McMahon while he's evidently interviewing the puke because I mean, which pretty much to me kind of said that you could really be anyone if you wanted to be a wrestler or of any sort. You just had to have some kind of a talent that would give them a leeway into being entertaining for others.
Well, I think it shows how they really capitalize on, you know, one or two things. When you have like a business like that, where a lot of it is show and some of it is physical ability, but like if you don't have both of those pieces, usually those are the guys that tend to fall flat. The ones who have a lot of physical ability but no personality, they can't do anything with that. It's like it has a shelf life. So I think Vince McMahon's such a smart producer in terms of how he finds these people who have both pieces of that puzzle to sort of capitalize on it. And it doesn't matter what it is. Like, obviously they could turn anything. A guy who can puke on command, they can turn that into a gimmick. Like, it's just a matter of finding those little things. And I think in a lot of cases, the individual wrestlers themselves had to really discover what their gimmick or their thing was going to be. So it's neat how they take that and make it huge. I feel like I sort of do that in terms of how I do my own personal burlesque performances. You know, I find something that because I've never been a dancer before this or really had any experience on stage, I had to come up with like, well, what is my thing? What is something that I can do or that I'm essentially good at that I can capitalize on stage and turn it into a performance. And I've been able to do that with the horror genre and the art that I produce within that. So I find it cool, those similarities.
That, and let's not forget that the horror genre for film overlaps rather heavily with wrestling in the form of like Undertaker and Kane and other characters like that. And then some people have said that in a way that wrestlers are kind of like real life, either superheroes or like some people have described it as like real life Street Fighter almost, which is interesting, except obviously you don't get any, you know,
I've also heard
Hadokens or anything like that.
I've also heard it coined as being the men's soap opera.
Mhm.
So basically, if you wanted to have a Days of Our Lives kind of show, except they're beating the fuck out of each other.
It's have you guys seen the South Park episode where they talk about this? It's basically that.
So
where it's like, what is their wrestling like? Their wrestling seems okay. Let's see how they pull it together in the second act. And the guy like pulls out like the theater like binoculars.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is basically
some guy pulls some guy's anus through his mouth.
Well, and you know, I don't know how many people. I don't know how many people have seen Amadeus, but so there's a point in the there's a point in the film where by this time we've seen Mozart play at like he's played before the Emperor and he's played in like these huge halls and everything. And one of the one of the things that he likes best is being able to go to this little kind of the more body shows that the commoners would go see, and that was something that he really enjoyed, and Shakespeare was that way as well. Like the theater in his time was seen as this bad thing, and and they had obviously the Queen was there, but then they also had the rabble, was there. So it's like um, there's always been that form of quote unquote common, entertainment, and in its own way, wrestling is that way, having evolved out of, a carnival kind of sideshow strongman attraction into a form of theater.
Well, yeah. And one of the things that I liked about seeing Vince McMahon talk about, what he considers that one thing you got to remember is that they are part of making films because
because they talked about having screenwriters
Yeah.
and like doing wardrobe. Like I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, and nowadays they literally make films because they have WWE studios, and it was not long after that point that their first production was The Scorpion King with The Rock, and they've gone on to do a whole lot of stuff since then. Most of it is now direct to video, but nonetheless, they've had a pretty thorough vehicle.
Didn't The Undertaker have like a horror movie or something that he was in? Like, I'm kind of curious to see that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned like
You're thinking of Kane, and he was in See No Evil 1 and 2.
Mummy movies came out, The Scorpion King and all those. That was when I was going through my major film student. I'm going to read all the reviews thing, and I still remember from that review for Mummy Returns, because it was, I think, one of the funnier snippets I've ever read, but it's also kind of is true, kind of some prescience there. Roger Ebert was talking about The Rock, and he's like, I've said for a long time The Rock has a film career ahead of him, and after seeing this movie, I believe it's still ahead of him. But
the Ebert review, right?
He definitely did. It's like Septim and I were doing that review earlier this year where he had looked up the monetary, what should have been the contenders for the Oscar if money was the only contender, and had it in a walk.
And also, let's be honest, I think he proved himself to be a really good actor. Like if you've ever seen Pain and Gain, I felt like he gave a really good performance in that.
He can also prove himself.
I like that like shitty comedy where he had to be like a dad. Like I enjoyed that movie.
Tooth Fairy or something.
Like he's like a football player and he finds out like he has like a daughter.
Oh, the Game Plan.
That was what.
Oh yeah.
I weirdly enjoyed that. It was kind of like neat.
It's kind of like when when Vin Diesel took on the pacifier role.
I really liked that.
Oh yeah.
Too. I don't know what it is. Like something about those just really does it for me.
Or even here's one from wrestling that everyone should remember: Hulk Hogan in Mr. Danny.
That's right.
Yeah, the last movie with a wrestler in it is They Live, so we can stop debating this.
Well,
They Live with Roddy Piper.
Which actually, speaking of movies with
I want to see
wrestlers in
Suburban
them,
Commando. Like I remember seeing ads for it, but I've never seen it.
Actually, Santa with Muscles is the best one.
What?
Santa with Muscles, best wrestler action movie of all time.
Speaking of wrestlers in movies, I got to. That's a good one. But I got to meet Kane at Dragon Con, and I got him to sign both of my Blu-ray copies of See No Evil 1 and 2, and he was super nice. He had his full mask on and everything, and he was sitting down, so he wasn't standing up. I know he's like 7 feet tall, but he was super nice, very approachable, and I just thought it was kind of funny that his hand could probably fit my entire head in it, and and I have a really big head, so that's saying something.
Hey, look at the case
Sting
of
twice.
Is he like giant? So he's like giant like Lou Ferrigno?
Oh,
Like
Kane?
the most towering human being I'd ever seen.
Well, he's definitely up there in terms of his height. I think that yeah. Well, Lou Ferrigno, and I actually met Lou Ferrigno too, and he was not nice to me. So I do not
I
recommend
saw
that.
Lou Ferrigno from a distance, but I didn't actually go up and meet him. I think he
I
was
went-
at Wizard World last year.
I went and talked to him,
Yeah.
but I didn't have money for his ridiculously expensive signature.
Lou Ferrigno, yeah, that
Yeah.
was all he
Wait,
could.
he's the Hulk, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't.
What about the Big Show? Has anybody met the Big Show? I've never
No.
met him, but my
Yeah.
ex did, and my ex said that it was ridiculous to see the Big Show hold a can of beer in his hand. Like he made it look like a toy, or like those really small soda cans. Like if you hold, like his entire hand could like engulf the entire thing.
Oh wow.
It just like fits in his palm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like with Lou Ferrigno, all he wanted was money to sign his autograph. That's really all he wanted, and so I just backed away because
Yeah, that's too bad.
I don't know. I was very not happy and disappointed at that. Not that I had a huge investment in it or anything. He wasn't like an idol of mine, but still, I tend to prefer the Kane experience where his persona is that of the demon and the big red monster and all that stuff. But he was really nice. I talked to him about like how his run for mayor was going and things like that, and because he's running for mayor of Knox County in Tennessee, where he lives.
That's another joke from that podcast. Is that they were watching his ad? They were watching his campaign ad, and they're like, "Is that Kane? Why is he wearing a suit?"
Oh yeah, well, he. I mean, I wanted to ask him about that because I found him kind of interesting. I find it interesting whenever people in the entertainment field go into politics of any sort, and I liked what he. I thought he had some interesting insights into like what his politics are, and just wanted to talk to. I would love to talk to him more about that, but
I want to talk to. I want to talk to Jesse Ventura. I mean, like, yeah, he's like a libertarian, but he's like the most sensible libertarian I've ever heard.
Well, and that's what I thought was interesting about him and Kane was that they both are of that persuasion, and especially like with Kane, like I know that he seems to know his political philosophy, and he seems to know what he's all about, and it's like that's good. I like no matter what someone thinks, I like it when people know what they think and why, and they can cite sources, and they're not just going along with the crowd, because that does not get any respect from me, no matter if it's left, right, whatever. I like it when people actually put the thought into whatever they believe.
Right.
Well, and there's something to be said about the celebrity that will even talk to you about it at all.
Oh yeah.
Versus the Lou Ferrigno who just wants the money for the autograph or whatever.
I know.
When I met Sting, I met him twice. Once, this most recent time, at Days of the Dead, and he was super personable and super talkative. And his question to me was the same question I had for him, which is, "What kind of makeup do you use?"
Nice.
He asked me first, so it was like, oh, I was gonna ask you the same thing. Come to find out, little fun tidbit: wrestlers use acrylic paint on their faces.
Makes
and
sense.
Not a water-based like makeup that's actually good for your skin. They use acrylic paint, and that's why it sort of peels off when they sweat, and it comes off in like chunks. And he says it's horrible and itchy and uncomfortable and terrible for the skin, which I absolutely 100% believe is true.
Yeah, I think I knew that actually. And if you've ever seen a video or photos of Sting after he's been wrestling for several minutes and all that. Like his makeup is coming off and it looks
Oh,
awful.
totally.
Which
It's
is too
like
bad.
chipping off.
I know it looks awful, but it's like, you know, the actual his overall look is incredible, and you just hate to see it messed up like that. But you know,
Well, the first time I met him out of makeup after it was here in Milwaukee for Monday Nitro, and I was with a friend of mine who's a huge Sting fan, and he had one of the main event matches, but not. It was the night that that Kevin Nash came back. He was injured for a while, and he was away, and he had come back at the Milwaukee show, and
I
it
have
was
a
like a
joke
really
for him
big
when you're done.
deal. Okay. And we left before they had wrapped it up because Sting wrestled a match, got out of the ring, and it was like, boom, we left. We got out of there because we were hoping to intercept them somehow. We knew where like the buses were or whatever, and we went down there, and sure enough, he had left the building, and she recognized him. No one else did. You know, he was out of makeup and in street clothes, and she recognized him, but she was too frozen and too like nervous to say anything. So I yelled for him, and he stopped and took a picture with us and was on his way. But still, really cool. Like he was definitely trying to get somewhere, but he stopped for us, which was cool.
One of the more memorable jokes on that podcast too is like during one of the episodes where they were talking about wrestling. It's called the Drunken Peasants podcast, by the way. It used to be Spectacular before the group split up. So there was an episode where they're like looking at like wrestlers and like comparing careers. And when they were talking about Kevin Nash, they were like, "Man, look at him now. Jeez. Well, what did he look like before?" And like they go and look at like pictures of him from the '90s, and they're like, "Wow!" And like one of the guys was by, and he's like, "Man, he's kind of hot." And so
He was kind of hot.
for a while, that was a joke where the guy would be like, "Mid-90s Kevin Nash, mid-90s Kevin Nash," and make like
I'm planning on
make, like,
meeting him and
motions.
Scott Hall next weekend. Days of the Dead Indie. They're even doing a photo op with both of them. So
he
I'm
actually
probably
knows
gonna.
the joke.
the other person who was there at Dragon Con with Kane, I think, was actually Ricky Steamboat, who
Oh yeah.
I know that he's supposed to be one of the most technically advanced, you know, wrestlers that ever was, which is, you know, quite a distinction. Even though he wasn't like the biggest star per se, I think he was renowned as being one of the best in the technical sphere.
Like I just
Yeah,
thought
and
it was.
probably are with a Rey Mysterio as well.
Oh, that was another thing too. One of the guys on on Drunken Peasants was like afraid to show his face for a while, so he was wearing like a Rey Mysterio style mask for like the first 140 episodes or something of it.
Mm-hmm.
He just got sick of wearing the mask. All of my wrestling knowledge comes from this show. I'm sorry, guys.
Well, that's why I recommend What Culture Wrestling, because after I was watching The Wrestler and then you know, was watching I went to my to Manifest Discs, and I was trying to grab up any kind of WWE you know, Blu-ray I could find to learn more about him. And so in the midst of all that, I was looking at the videos on What Culture Wrestling, and I learned all about you know, just some of the history of the craft, and you know, just a lot of the famous incidents and other movies about wrestling to watch, whether real or fictional. You know, just all that's a great. It's a great crash course. And I also play. Anybody with an iPhone, I also love to play WWE Immortals, which is a great fighting game with WWE superstars. And let's see what else. But that's a great way to learn about it. And it also introduced me to you know, other great movies about wrestling, and one of the more famous incidents in wrestling history, which also has its own great documentary covering the incident, which was called
In 1998, when Undertaker threw Mankind off.
nope, it was called Wrestling with Shadows. It was about Bret Hart, and it covers the infamous Montreal Screwjob, where basically Vince McMahon went back on his word as far as how how Bret Hart was going to go out, because he had signed a contract with WCW and he wanted to go out a certain way, and Vince McMahon went back on his word, and he was so upset. Bret Hart was so upset that he actually he punched Vince McMahon so hard that he knocked him out cold.
Damn.
That would be if you see a sign at or you used to back in the day, see a sign at every event that was like Vince screwed Brett or whatever the signs would be, or Brett got screwed or whatever.
Well, and then you watch the interviews of Vince McMahon after that incident, and he said explicitly, "I have no respect for Bret Hart whatsoever," and so he was completely unapologetic for what happened.
Totally. But got to keep that drama going.
Well, honestly, that just fits into the kind of person that Vince McMahon is. Like, he is.
Didn't he die?
No, he's still alive. He's very old now, but the problem also is that his daughter Stephanie has kind of inherited the crazy gene that he has.
I remember.
And then Linda McMahon his wife is actually in the Trump administration now as the small businesses. Forget what her exact title is, but I actually thought that was not too bad of an idea, just because WWE was a small business for quite a number of years, as were all the other wrestling territories, and then through Vince McMahon's just ruthless acquisitions, he just gobbled up all the other territories, and it became this mega franchise, mega company. But so there's that, and then I know that she is rather level-headed, and then the son, whose name I can't remember, he's kind of the silent one.
Shane.
Yeah, Shane McMahon. Yeah, he supposedly
he's on the shows all the time.
Yeah, I've heard that he's one of the more sane ones, but I know that Stephanie has inherited Vincent's his insane gene.
Well, I don't know what she's like as a regular person. I only know her from her role on, like Raw and SmackDown or whatever. And she was always the most annoying person. I couldn't stand her. Oh,
I've heard behind the scenes, with the help of What Culture Wrestling, that she is just as insane behind the scenes as Vince McMahon is behind the scenes.
I believe it. And basically, she's married to Triple H, and he pretty much runs the WWE now.
Yeah, talk about Machiavellian. Way to marry into your royalty there.
Actually, one thing I was going to ask, I was thinking of this movie about the independence scene. I've actually had several people who've done independent when I was working with clients back in the day, and when they would and those particular individuals, they would tell me about the stuff that went on. Of course, the fact that there was no money, the terrible quality, and all of that kind of reminded me of the original Rocky in a way, where you get to see because when you look at things, I mean, boxing and wrestling have similarities and differences, but they both have a very dangerous, very seedy underbelly. Both of them do. Most people don't see that. They just see the top. They just see the big matches, the pay-per-views, all of that. But they both seem to go like right at the bottom. Do you see any parallel really between some of those two sports in that way? I mean, shoot, a lot of people you talk to will say that boxing's as rigged as wrestling is.
Well, there is actually a film. Well, there's actually a couple of films under the same title and story called Requiem for a Heavyweight.
Oh, and yeah, great film.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about a ex-boxer who can't really cut it as a boxer anymore, so he becomes a wrestler and hates it, so it but even so, it's like the same kind of seediness, disrespect, things like that follow him there,
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, One thing I want to say about the documentary is I actually remember watching the match between Mankind and The Rock, because when I was in high school, I actually hung out with a group of friends who would actually watch, the wrestling when Hell in a Cell was going on and whatnot, and we'd gather together and we'd watch it. And
you were there that one time in 1998 when
I wasn't there, but I at least was watching when it was live.
They beat that joke to absolute death. I'm sorry, it's all from the repetition, like where they would just like whip out the phrase like at the end of. It's complicated. You had to be there.
Oh yeah, and it was definitely a big match. I remember seeing those reactions on the kids and whatnot, and I remember the wrestling announcers, stating exactly what they were saying in the documentary. So, but it was really cool to see, like I know that this has been mentioned before, the reaction that Mick Foley had upon seeing the edit of the film, the way the reactions were portrayed. So,
well, and here's a kind of similar question, but different at the same time. Kind of for the the women watching. I know that historically that the art of pro wrestling was not terribly friendly to women. It tended to be more of a guy's thing, even though lots of women watched it. And that a lot of like the gimmicks that Vince McMahon would do to the female wrestlers were very, explicitly sexually harassing. And granted, that was the character of Vince McMahon as well as
As well as some person
probably, yeah, but to a lesser extent, I'm sure. But then subsequently, with the current decade, the role of female wrestlers has greatly expanded. So just kind of wanted to get some perspective there because I know that there's like the
not necessarily that it brings in ratings, but one of the things that I'd seen over the last year or so is that women's wrestling with the matches, some of them have actually become main events. In some of these characters, like with Nia Jackson and who is that?
Well, I mean,
the Bella twins.
Yeah, look at the prominence of them and Paige and all that stuff. It's the point is that you take this art form and this form of athleticism that often get swept under the rug as being lowbrow or whatever, and then you see some of the elements of it from the past that weren't terribly friendly towards women in the way that they comparatively are today. So it's like it shows you how much that we as a society and how much that side of things has evolved.
I have to admit, I don't like I said, I don't follow wrestling now, but I never did follow it for the women. I was always. I
just remember back in the day, the only wrestler, it was like China, and she was always like the cheerleader, standing on the side cheering them on,
Well, China,
she was a big deal. Lita was a big deal. Trish Stratus. I mean, those are the female wrestlers that
but they were always like, standing on the side. They never actually got to wrestle very much.
They did. They became main eventers. Like Trish Stratus had the women's championship for quite a while. Lita was a big contender. Like more in the 80s, the women's roles were more of the stand around, kind of come down to the ring on the wrestler's arm and stuff. But I think that Attitude Era really showed a boost in the female wrestlers and actually wrestlers with some talent. Like I don't follow it today, so I don't know. My daughter has a few favorites, but from what I understand, it has gotten to be even more of a, like Dane was saying, more of a main event.
My personal favorite of remembering women in wrestling is when Stephanie McMahon had her hair shaved in I believe it was a table, ladder, and chair match where he lost. And I think she went up against her father. And she got her
that was
hair
like,
shaved.
wasn't that late 90s or early 2000s, something like that?
Early 2000s, something like that. And because it was like a big match because she was going up against her daddy, you know. So she had to get her hair shaved right after she lost, you know.
Well, and
Fucking weird.
the other thing I thought, the incest implications between those two are pretty strong in other instances. But the other thing I think is interesting because one of the big talking points these days is all about representation and that sort of thing. And I think that historically, a lot of the people that tended to be in wrestling tended to be white men, and that's depending on which sport, you can, like, for legit sports, you can have the demographics of, the kind of people that play can be pretty even. They can be pretty skewed one way or the other. But I also do think that from, what I think that the field has expanded quite a lot with people like Rey Mysterio, or even like, in the 90s there was like Yokozuna, and then you think about like The Rock, who's of African American and Samoan descent and that kind of stuff. So it does seem like the field on that front has opened as well, and in terms of like who can be very prominent.
Wasn't there a rumor going around that some of the women were getting sexually harassed
Wouldn't surprise
at one
me.
point?
I was about to say that wouldn't surprise me either.
Wouldn't surprise me.
In every job, in every piece of entertainment, everywhere. Yes.
I don't know if it was. I can't remember, but
There is. I guarantee you, no matter which workplace that you work at, there's going to be a little bit of sexual innuendos among coworkers.
Well, and as a female who's worked in a male-dominated environment for very many years, I can tell you that male-dominated fields, whether it's in entertainment or just a regular job, like, there's always that awkward sort of pressure. I've been sexually harassed in the workplace since I was 16 years old. Every job I've ever had, up to present day workplace, I've been sexually harassed by a male coworker. Like, it's just one of those things that sadly is all too common. And I think I learned that it was just sort of something that happened that, like, I didn't even realize that it wasn't normal, I guess. Yeah, and I can see the wrestling industry probably having a lot of that same, I think it's probably changing with the times too, though.
Well, in these days, you can just look at a woman and it's rape. So it's.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. There is a legitimate issue with sexual harassment and sexual assault that is going on, particularly in the entertainment industry and in the Hollywood scenes, and it's a huge problem. And I think, that idea that, just looking at a woman and it's rape, no, not really. I think most women are pretty reasonable about what is considered harassment or assault. But it is a legitimate issue that is all too common.
What's sad is that it is too common and like you said, it doesn't really matter which industry it is, because I think it's partially demographics of the industry. Part of it is historically, part of it is the inevitable echo chamber effect that happens when, it's historically been that way and that's all you hear and it becomes normalized and all that kind of stuff. And,
it's like living in a vacuum.
Yeah,
if you have no frame of reference.
But the nice thing is that with any art form, any entertainment venture will inevitably change with the times, and the fact that wrestling has changed with the times, unquestionably, in terms of its demographics and in terms of the kind of wrestlers that are able to be seen and admired and all that stuff. The point is that there's the place at the table is becoming increasingly broad in its definition, and as it should be in no matter what industry you're talking about. And the fact that something like that can change, a field that is often derided, unreasonably so. It is hope for any occupation that the definition of what it means to have a place at the table can continually be expanded.
Oh,
Did you
yeah.
notice how in the film when China was being interviewed and her parents were like, they didn't like when I worked out too much. They thought I looked like a lesbian.
Well, I saw that too. I mean, when you're a female and you start working out more, which is something that a male normally does,
Right? Yeah.
Unfortunately,
there are a lot of women that work out, but usually the kind of exercises are not like serious, like bodybuilding kind of stuff. Like,
I mean, there are women bodybuilders, of course. It's just not as common a thing for women to want to put on muscle mass like that.
Well, and certainly not in that way, because usually, like, people like Jillian Michaels are usually fairly slim, and they have muscles, sure, but not like they're not necessarily like.
Well, and she was pretty jacked for being a woman.
Absolutely.
It's about
it's
challenging cultural
It's a sport within itself, really.
Don't get me wrong or anything. I'm not trying to say this to be rude, but I seem to remember a rumor that China's boobs deflated at one point in time, and she had to.
I think she popped some implants wrestling.
Didn't she die a couple years ago?
She did.
Like a year ago, I think, or so.
Oh,
what happened?
I met her at I think it was Days of the Dead, Indianapolis, and she was dead like 2 months later.
Didn't she die?
She also had a really, really tough life as she got older, and she had to turn to like adult films and things like that.
Oh yeah.
Really?
She did. That was towards the end of her career. She did it. She actually had a pretty good run in the adult film industry. Made her some decent money.
Yeah.
So I do think that we are seeing a change, which is a positive. I mean, if you were to say 20 years ago that Ocean's 8 would beat out a new Star Wars movie, regardless of what it is, in the theaters, it would people would look at you strange because the concept would be so alien to them. But the fact is that movies like that movies with female leads who don't rely on any men to get by is a huge thing. The fact that those films can actually beat the other films and showing Hollywood that those films can be viable is a good thing, in my opinion. It's a good thing for diversity, a good thing for Hollywood in general. I feel like we're going through more of a golden age. I mean, you've got some good films. I mean, Ghostbusters, I didn't think was the one that did it as much as this one more, in my opinion. But
I was gonna say, hopefully the worst is behind us.
Well, my big beef with Ghostbusters was that it was a toxic combination of, which I never actually saw the movie, and I'm also not like a mega fan of Ghostbusters in general.
It is terrible beyond description.
That's what I heard. But here's the thing: like
the remake, I disagree that it was terrible.
I disagree.
I just thought that there was a lot of racial insensitivity in it, which I did not.
Well, there's not only that, but here's the thing: my big beef with the whole thing is this: on a conceptual level was what I was afraid was going, because like what we were saying before, absolutely, great that more female driven films are getting made and all that stuff. I think that's wonderful. My big fear with the other side of that coin is that Me Too Hollywood took a look at the success of something like Bridesmaids and was saying, oh, this had women in it. So I think that and they were doing unladylike things. And so therefore the formula must be, oh, let's take some classically male dominated thing and we'll put women in it and that will automatically make us money. And it'll be a remake too. So we got a familiar brand name going on. Oh my, we don't even have to think about a new idea, and that's what it was to me. That's how it came across, is that it was like this toxic combination of those two things. And it was like, oh, we care about being progressive, but not really. And then, of course, now with Me Too having happened, it's like, oh, maybe we actually kind of have a shot at these things being done for the right reasons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, one description I heard of what you were describing was, see, women can be just as stupid as men. Gotcha. Like that was how one person like summarized it, and it's like, I never really liked fart jokes, and why are we doing this? Oh my god! Like I defended Ghostbusters like during like the initial troll storm because I was like, I'm sure it's fine, guys, relax. And then all the reviews came out and they were like, it's the worst thing ever. And I'm like, I'm sure they're overreacting. And then I sat there with my mouth open, like, this is worse than I've heard. Oh my god! Like, it was mind numbing. It's like, wow. It's like, are these all first time actresses? Like, nobody knows shit about comedy. And I find out it's like, oh yeah, they're like the headliners from Saturday Night Live. It's like, are you sure? Holy shit. Like, it was the worst movie I saw that year by a very wide margin.
Yeah, I would disagree with you, but
Who's getting a phone call? What the F?
Oh, sorry. I just gotta have to let it go.
Can you mute it so it's not ringing? Oh my fuck!
So let's just sit and listen to that
You know how to
ringing
turn it
sound.
off, right?
Okay.
All right. Sorry.
All right, there it goes.
Awkward pause.
I think that it is good though that you see women gaining that. Another example, though you might disagree with me, Dustin, on that is the not the recent one, but the other one, episode 7, which I haven't seen 8 yet, so I can't really say anything about. But that movie showed that you could have a female lead, and shoot, you could have an African American co-star, which Hollywood deemed as poison not long ago.
It did?
And still have a really good and successful movie. And I mean, I actually was one of the ones who really liked the film.
Oh, well, I've liked all the.
That whole sensibility is weird to me because, like, I've never. I'm used to movies with like Chris Rock, like from the '90s. Like, I never thought that it was like an unusual thing to have.
Well, I think that what he's talking about are like big tentpole movies. That, and also just on a larger kind of percentage level of, because there's been comedies and all that stuff that's been done, but
what about Will Smith and Men in Black?
But a lot of those, I mean, well, Men in Black is different in that sense. And again, there have been different ones. I mean, just like you've got Denzel Washington movies and stuff like that, but they've always been treated more as this is our token person up in there, and that's not right. I mean, I feel like this time it is about mainstream. This is not about like we're just going to throw this out.
Well, and I would go even further than the new Star Wars films, which I think do a good job of including a pretty wide swath of humans and aliens and men and women and all that stuff.
I don't think they do a good job of anything, but okay.
Well, that's because you're you. And then, but I would go further than that, which is with Black Panther, which has very few white characters at all.
Oh, yeah.
And has very strong, prominent black women, has, people in an African nation that is very proud of its heritage, and its technological advancement, and you have interesting characters. You have good real world conflicts that also don't drag down the optimism of it. You know, it's like that for me is like the big victory of this year in terms of
Black Panther was pretty fucking sweet. Like,
but you see what
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
saying? It's like
Yeah.
that's what I've been wanting for a long time. Is I've been wanting a film that was able to speak to those issues, but was able to show a lot of the strengths. Because it's kind of the exact opposite of like a blaxploitation film, which was always sure it had some assertive black characters, but it was always through the lens of adversity and kind of from a place of like vengeance and things like that, as opposed to like really digging down and saying who are we and how are we going to use ourselves, our heritage, our identity to make this world better, and that's really what it was about.
That's what I look at when I see people talking about the Blade movies. Like, yeah, but the Blade movies really did remind me more of the old blaxploitation films. Though I do feel it was great having that, but I did feel that's how it resembled it. Shoot, I could actually have seen Wesley Snipes doing blaxploitation pictures.
This fall,
he would
Wesley
have been
Snipes is Shaft.
he would have been good in that.
Oh yeah.
Hell up in the heart.
Well, nothing against Black Dynamite, however, which
Or what was that? Undercover Brother.
Okay.
oh.
Still need to see that.
No, my wife likes white chicks, and
I
can't stand white chicks.
I know a lot of people that like that, and I've never seen it. I've heard it's got kind of its own cult following now.
Seems like it seems like a really weird premise, but I haven't seen it.
It's pretty hilarious.
I've never heard people say that they hated it per se. Like it's
I've
weird for that movie.
I've seen I've seen the photos of them in the makeup, and they do.
They look fairly convincing.
Well, the problem, I mean, kind of, except the problem also is that if you look at them, they almost don't look like humans. They look like
Aliens in costumes.
Yeah, kind of like aliens trying to pass themselves off as human. And yeah, but either that or
And then walk reference.
that or they're like, I don't know. You almost want to look at them and go, "Are you okay? Do you need to go to the hospital or what?"
In any case, I think that we will wrap this up since I think we've talked about this. So why don't we start with Brandon? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do?
I run a YouTube channel called Septum Sen versus the World. I occasionally, actually probably most of the time, have Kotobuki Jake on with me. Matter of fact, we just dropped a video just about maybe 15 minutes ago that I had edited the first part of this video. But we dedicate ourselves to physical media for the most part. We talk about upcoming movie releases. One of the things we've started doing recently actually is talking about theatrical releases coming up during the week, which adding to our regular newscast, and in general just celebrate just the good parts of physical media. Also one other recent thing is I just dropped a review last week on one we talked about last week, Slime City. I did my review of that collection and finally put that up. So very happy that actually made it out.
And why don't we go to Red Raven? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I'm Red Raven, and I'm from Lake Geneva, and I book shows in the Milwaukee area, and I'm a Dead Girl on Dead Girl's Dark Coffin Classics. And we have a show, I have a show coming up at the Frequency in Madison on Sunday the 17th. with Repaid in Blood, Chewing Teeth, Skyla, and H1Z1. And that'll be one of the last shows you'll be able to see there, as the place is closing down on the 30th.
Awesome. And Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure, I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a body-positive horror artist and alternative model. You can find me at patreon.com/Katie Cadaver, or on Instagram at Third Eye Open, 3RDEYE0PN. I'm also the makeup artist for horror punk band Ratbat Spider. You can listen to them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com, or you can see them this Saturday in Janesville, and now I forgot the name of the place where they're playing, but find them on Bandcamp, find them on Facebook, and you can find all the details for their show this Saturday. I'm also a dead girl for Degger's Dark Coffin Classics, and you can watch this show at vimeo.com/DDCC. And I perform and produce for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque, and you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Grindhouse Tees. And I'm also an editor for Movies Galore of Milwaukee, and you can check out my first review of Adam LaHoulier's The Backslide by checking out our Facebook page or the blog.
Awesome. Kabuki Jake, again, welcome back to the show, and thank you for being with us again. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Glad to be here. As Tipton said, I've guest semi-regularly on his channel, and of course, occasionally do side projects as far as technically have a Hub Pages page. It's not updated very often, but there's some fun stuff to be had there, and occasionally submit solo videos for the channel. Otherwise, it's been, most of my time split between one job or another, and trying to read in the meantime, and try to write. But I've lately been on a reading kick as homework for writing, if you will.
Cool.
Yep.
And going over to Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I just graduated from the GIS certificate program at UW Milwaukee. So I'm looking for jobs involving GIS. I'm also supposed to be an editor for Inside Movies Galore, and we've almost got my career stuff settled down to where I can start to put some time into it. So yeah, planning on doing reviews. There's one that's almost done. I just need to get the time to polish it off. I collect horror anything from figures to prints to movies, and I showcase my stuff on my Instagram, DHRHunter, all one word. And so after a little bit later, I want to try to catalog all my stuff onto the Instagram. So it's gonna be a bumpy ride there, because I think I have maybe 1 to 2% of what I actually own on there right now.
Okay.
It's gonna be an exciting time. Currently in a death feud with Best Buy, because apparently they can sell you a new movie with nothing in the case. None of their service people have any idea what to do.
I think it was a personal conspiracy against you, Dustin.
I'm mad. I'm mad enough to not think clearly.
Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and where you're from?
I am Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and you can find me on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all the other social media doohickeys that the kids are into these days. I have been very busy. I am currently working on a Harley Quinn fan film called Harley Quinn Pop Culture Nightmare, which will be on YouTube probably sometime in 2019. And what else am I doing? Helping my girlfriend with her web series. I got 2 short films that got included into 2 horror anthology feature films, one of which is For We Are Many, released by Hex Studios. The other one is called Clownsploitation, made by the people who did the Grindsploitation films. And there was one that David alerted me to that is about monsters, I think, and that one actually, I did get an email back from the guy, and he will let me know as soon as he knows more about like due dates and stipulations and stuff. But yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Lots and lots more going on, but those are some of the big things that are recent.
Cool. And I'm David Strege. I'm your host for the evening, and I run Movies Galore Milwaukee, which is a blog as well as a group. And I am a small-time producer. One of the things that I not too recently produced last year is actually out for another day or so, being free, called Vaults, the prologue, which has not been submitted to festivals yet. I know it just recently finished, and you can watch it on my page if you want to. It's the first thing that you'll probably come across watching on my page per se, so definitely check that out. And also, I am a producer behind Wrestle Massacre, which is coming out, which is partially, I think, why we went into this documentary to discuss some of the wrestling stuff behind it, and get ourselves out there on the wrestling world. So, in any case, one of the things that I have just started producing is called Spirits in the Dark, which is from a Hungarian director, which I will think more of it once things come about on it. But definitely looking forward to sharing the experience as I know more. In any case, thank you all for listening to a great discussion on this documentary. I think it was a good discussion.
It was a good documentary. I was pretty happy to see it.
And I was happy to see it myself, at least so that I can say that I have. And we can move on to bigger and better things. So everyone say good night.
Good night.
Night.
Night.